For 3 years, I let them believe I was disappearing. Not because I was afraid, not because I didn't know what was happening around me, but because the moment my neurologist used the word early onset in the same sentence as memory decline, I watched something shift behind my daughter-in-law's eyes. Not fear, not grief, something closer to calculation. The kind of look a person gets when they realize a door they've been waiting for has finally cracked open. My name is Eleanor Voss. I am 64 years old. I live in a 3-story colonial on Westerfield Road in Concord, Massachusetts, with a garden my late husband planted 22 years ago and a kitchen that still smells like the cinnamon rolls I used to make every Sunday morning, before the world decided I was no longer capable of running my own oven. I want to be precise about what the diagnosis actually said, because precision matters when people spend years trying to convince you that your memory is gone. The neurologist, Dr. Okafor, told me there were early signs of cognitive slowing. Not dementia, not Alzheimer's. Cognitive slowing. She said with lifestyle adjustments, proper sleep, reduced stress, and cognitive engagement, progression could be managed for years, possibly halted entirely. She said I was, in her words, sharper than most people half my age. What she did not say, and what I never corrected when my son began repeating a different version to everyone who would listen, was that I was losing my mind. That version came from my son, Daniel, who heard what he wanted to hear and then gifted that version to his wife, Renata, who accepted it like a present she'd been waiting for all along. The shift was gradual at first. Small things. Daniel began attending my financial meetings with my accountant, speaking for me, offering summaries I hadn't asked for. Renata started calling my estate attorney directly, asking questions about transition planning and simplified asset structures. She used phrases like, given Eleanor's condition, with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed them in the mirror. I let it happen. I kept quiet, kept still, kept my expressions soft and slightly unfocused in their presence, the way I'd seen my Aunt Louise look in her final years when she truly couldn't remember the names of her grandchildren. I studied that look. I borrowed it. I wore it like a coat, and I listened. Our housekeeper, Rosario, knew the truth from the beginning. She had worked for us for 11 years, long before Richard died, long before the diagnosis, long before any of this. She was the one who drove me to Dr. Okafor's office and sat in the waiting room reading a magazine with her reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she was the one who squeezed my hand in the parking lot afterward when I told her what I planned to do. You can't be serious, she said. I'm completely serious, I told her. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded and said, okay, but I'm not going to pretend to anyone that you're confused when I know you're not. I told her she didn't have to pretend anything. She just had to stay quiet. Rosario was, and remains, the most honest person I have ever known. She did not agree with my plan entirely. She thought I should confront Daniel directly, sit him down, show him the documents, demand an accounting. She said this plainly and without apology every few weeks, the way she brought it up like a bill that had come due. But she also understood why I wasn't ready. She had worked in this house long enough to know that Daniel was not a man who responded to being cornered. He responded by rewriting the story until he was the reasonable one and everyone else was confused or overreacting. I needed more than a confrontation. I needed the whole picture. The first time I understood how far things had gone was a Tuesday in October, 14 months after the diagnosis. Daniel and Renata had come for dinner, which they did once or twice a month, always arriving with a performance of concern and always leaving a little earlier than they said they would. I had cooked pot roast because it was Richard's recipe, and because cooking it grounded me in a way I couldn't fully explain. Dinner was warm enough. Daniel talked about work, a new project, some expansion his firm was undertaking. Renata complimented the house in the way she always did, meaning she complimented the objects in the house, the credenza, the dining table, the vintage Tiffany lamp above it. She once told a friend at a dinner party, not knowing I was 3 feet away, and perfectly capable of hearing that our home had good bones. She meant the structure. I understood she was not talking about architecture. After dessert, I excused myself to get more coffee from the kitchen. I stood just inside the door, back against the wall, and let their voices come to me. "Did you get a chance to talk to Leonard?" Renata asked. "Not yet," Daniel said. "I want to wait until after the holidays. It looks better if we space it out. She's going to forget she already signed the first set. I know that. Then why wait? Because Leonard knows her. He's going to ask questions if we come back too fast with the cottage deed and the brokerage forms all at once. I want it to look like her idea. A pause, the sound of a fork set down on a plate. It is her idea, Renata said. She just doesn't remember which ideas are hers anymore. I stood in the kitchen with my hand resting on the countertop and felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Anger would have been too loud, too consuming. What I felt was quieter than that. It was the closing of a door I had kept open for 3 years, hoping I was wrong about what I saw in my daughter-in-law's eyes that first afternoon. I was not wrong. I filled 2 coffee cups and carried them back to the dining room with steady hands and an expression that showed nothing at all. The following morning, I called my attorney, Margaret Chu. I had known Margaret for 27 years, long enough that she picked up on the second ring and said, "Eleanor, tell me everything." Before I had said more than hello, I told her everything. There was a long pause when I finished. Then she said, "I need you to come in. I need you to tell no one," I said. "Not a word to Leonard or anyone else at the firm until I say so. And I need to know exactly what has been signed, transferred, or reassigned in the last 3 years with my name on it." "Understood?" she said. Come Thursday, what Margaret found over the following 2 weeks was methodical and, in its own way, impressive. Daniel had not stolen outright. He was too careful for that, too practiced in the language of wealth management and fiduciary responsibility. What he had done was quieter. He had gradually positioned himself as my primary contact on 3 of my investment accounts, using the diagnosis as justification for oversight. He had begun the process of transferring my vacation property in Vermont into a joint family trust structured so that he controlled all decisions, and I retained only nominal ownership. He had also, through his own attorney, quietly drafted a new power of attorney document that had not yet been signed, but was clearly being prepared for the right moment, meaning the moment he decided I was confused enough not to question it. Leonard, my longtime estate attorney, had not been complicit. Exactly. He had been careless. He had taken Daniel's word for things he should have verified with me directly. Margaret was furious. I told her to stay professional. I would handle Leonard separately. I want to be clear about something, because it matters. During all of this, Daniel still called me twice a week. He remembered my birthday. He brought flowers when he visited, usually tulips, because I had once mentioned in passing that I liked tulips. He told me he loved me with what sounded like sincerity. And sometimes, watching him at the dinner table, laughing at something Rosario said, holding his wine glass, looking so much like his father, I felt the grief of it move through me like weather. This was not a villain. This was my son, who had somewhere along the way allowed fear, greed, and a wife who measured everything by its market value to erode something that had once been real between us. That distinction mattered to me, even then. Especially then. Margaret completed her audit in 11 days. She presented it to me in her office on a cold November afternoon, laid out in a binder organized by date. I read it carefully, the way I used to read grant proposals back when I ran the Arts Foundation, looking for the sentence where the ask didn't match the justification. It was all there, systematic, patient, and wearing the costume of concern. I told Margaret what I wanted to do. She looked at me across her desk for a long moment. "You know this will be irreversible," she said. "I know. And you've thought about whether there's another path." "I've thought about nothing else for 3 years," I said. She nodded once and opened her legal pad. We spent 2 hours drafting. I dictated the new will with care, going through each provision deliberately, making sure Margaret read each clause back to me so nothing was left to interpretation. The estate would be reorganized entirely. The Arts Foundation Richard and I had funded jointly would receive the bulk of it, endowed specifically for emerging women artists over 40, a category the art world consistently undervalued. The Concord House would be preserved as an artist residency for 5 years before passing to the foundation. The Vermont cottage, the one Daniel had been quietly working to absorb, would go to the Concord Land Trust outright. And to Rosario, who had kept my confidence without being asked to and who had shown up every day for 11 years without ever treating me like a problem to be managed, I left a sum that would allow her to be free. I said exactly that to Margaret. Free. Margaret wrote it down and did not ask me to clarify. Daniel's inheritance was not eliminated. I was not interested in pure punishment. He would receive a modest trust, structured so it could not be liquidated for 10 years. Enough to live on, not enough to coast on. Enough to require him to build something himself. Margaret filed the documents with the court. We moved quietly, as I had been moving for 3 years. I told Rosario that evening. She was at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, and I sat down across from her and told her what I had arranged for her. She looked at me for a long moment, and then pressed her hand flat on the table between us like she needed something solid. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She cried then, quickly and without ceremony, the way practical people cry when they're caught off guard by kindness. Then she wiped her face and said, "So what happens next?" "We have dinner," I said. I asked Daniel and Renata to come on a Saturday in early December. I framed it as a holiday dinner. Nothing unusual. I asked Rosario to use the good china, the set Richard and I had received as a wedding gift. The one we only brought out for occasions worth commemorating. I chose a wine I knew Daniel liked. I made the pot roast again because I wanted the house to feel exactly like itself, warm and familiar, so that the contrast would be sharper. They arrived at 6. Renata wore a blue dress and carried a bottle of wine she handed to Rosario without making eye contact. Daniel kissed my cheek and said, "You look wonderful, Mom." And I believed that he believed it, and I held on to that for a moment before I let it go. We ate and talked about the usual things. His work, their plans for New Year's, a trip to Portugal they were considering. Renata asked, with the careful tone she used when she was trying to sound casual, whether I'd had a chance to look over the document Leonard had sent last week. I told her I'd misplaced it. She smiled. "I'll have another copy sent over," she said. "It's really just a formality. Better to have everything organized while you're feeling well. While you're feeling well." She said it so naturally. After dessert, I cleared the plates myself, even though Rosario moved to help. I waved her off. I wanted to stand and move and feel the full steadiness of my own body for a moment. Then I sat back down, folded my hands on the table, and looked at my son. He was telling a story about something that had happened at work, something amusing, his voice easy and warm. Renata was laughing. The candles between us cast everything in soft gold. He looked like his father. He looked like the boy who used to fall asleep reading on the living room floor and who cried, just once, at his father's funeral, in the car on the way home, where he thought no one could see. I waited until he finished the story. Then I said, "I'd like to talk about the Vermont cottage." Something shifted in the air, subtle, like a pressure change before rain. Daniel glanced at Renata. "Of course," he said carefully. "Are you thinking about what to do with it long term?" "I'm thinking about what you've already done with it," I said, or tried to. The room went quiet, not the comfortable kind. "Mom," he said. I seem what?" I asked pleasantly. He stopped. Rosario appeared in the kitchen doorway, and I gave her a small nod. She disappeared back inside and returned a moment later with Margaret, who had been waiting in the sitting room for the past 40 minutes. Margaret set her briefcase on the dining room table with the composed efficiency of someone who had done this kind of thing before and would do it again. Renata looked from Margaret to me with an expression I had not seen on her before. Something unguarded. "This is Margaret Chu," I said. "My attorney, my actual attorney, not Leonard." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Mom, what is this?" "This is a conversation we should have had 3 years ago," I said. But I needed to be sure of what I was dealing with first. I watched him understand. It moved across his face, slowly, like light changing in a room as clouds pass. He looked at the briefcase. He looked at Margaret. He looked at me. And for the first time in 3 years, he looked at me without any performance in it. No careful enunciation. No patient, slightly pained concern. Just his own face, unmanaged. "How much do you know?" he asked quietly. "Everything," Margaret said, opening the briefcase. "Every transfer, every call with Leonard, every draft document your attorney prepared." Renata reached for her wine glass and found it empty. I said, "I know about the brokerage oversight structure. I know about the Vermont transfer filing. I know about the power of attorney document you've been holding until the right moment. I know about the conversation you had in this dining room in October because I was standing 12 feet away, and I am not confused, and I have never been confused." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Mom." "Let me finish," I said. "And I will speak. So please listen to me without interrupting, because I have been listening to both of you for a very long time." He was quiet. "I know what you did," I said. "I know why you thought you could. I know that, Doctor. Okafor's report was stretched into something it wasn't. And I know that you told people things about my condition that were not true. I know that Renata has walked through this house for 3 years, pricing it room by room, and I know that you let her, and I know that somewhere along the way you told yourself it wasn't really wrong because I would be taken care of, and the assets would stay in the family, and it was all just forward planning." His face was white. "I want you to know something," I said. "I am not standing in front of you as a victim. I am standing in front of you as your mother, who made a choice not to stop you before I understood whether there was anything left in you worth preserving." "What does that mean?" he asked. His voice was low, stripped of its usual confidence. "It means that I watched you bring tulips," I said. "It means I watched you call twice a week and ask how I was sleeping and whether the garden was holding up through the cold. It means there were moments in the last 3 years when I saw your father in you so clearly that I nearly said something too soon. I needed to understand whether those moments were real." He looked down at the table. "Margaret will walk you through the new documents," I said. "You should read them carefully." Margaret opened the binder and began to explain. I watched my son listen. I watched his shoulders drop as she reached the section on his inheritance. I watched him understand that he was not cut out entirely, that what I had left him was not cruelty but consequence, designed to require something from him rather than simply provide for him. Renata was very quiet throughout. At one point she said, "Celeste," and I corrected her without sharpness. "Eleanor," I said. She had never learned to use my actual name correctly. I had never corrected her before. I corrected her now. When Margaret finished, Daniel sat with his hands flat on the table, looking at the binder. He didn't argue. He didn't negotiate. He said nothing for almost a full minute. Then he asked, "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about that. I had thought about that question, actually, long before he asked it. Knowing it might come. "Yes," I said. "You can stop pretending and start over. Not with me, necessarily. Not right away. But in general, you can stop treating people like balance sheets and start treating them like people. You can figure out who you are when you're not managing someone else's assets." He looked up. "You are your father's son," I said. "That means something. But you've been spending it badly." Rosario appeared in the doorway again with their coats, because Rosario has always understood when a room is finished. Renata stood immediately, not meeting anyone's eyes, gathering her bag with the clipped efficiency of someone evacuating. Daniel rose more slowly. He took his coat from Rosario and paused. I saw him look at Rosario directly, the way he almost never did, and say, I'm sorry. Not to me, to her, as if some part of him understood, without being told, what her presence in this story meant. Rosario held his gaze and said plainly, "Thank you, Daniel." Then he turned to me. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I know you don't," I said. "That's perhaps the most honest thing you've said to me in 3 years. Let's start from there." He nodded once and walked out. The sound of the front door closing was not loud. It was just a door closing, ordinary and final and completely clear. The house was quiet after. Rosario came in and began clearing the wine glasses, and I sat at the table for a long time with my hands in my lap, listening to the familiar sounds of the kitchen. Water running, the soft clink of crystal, the furnace cycling on against the December cold. Outside, the first real snow of the season had begun to fall. I could hear it, almost, the way snow has its own silence, specific and complete, the kind that makes everything else sound closer. I thought about Richard, as I often do in December. I thought about the way he used to stand at the kitchen window after a snowfall, coffee in hand, just watching, as if the stillness were a thing worth paying attention to. He would have known what to say to Daniel in that moment. He always knew. I had spent years thinking I needed to learn that skill from him, and had finally accepted, at 64, that it was simply not my gift. What was my gift was staying and watching and holding the whole picture until the picture was complete. In January, Rosario told me that Daniel had taken a position with a nonprofit, not a prestigious one, not the kind with galas and donor lists, but a small organization in Roxbury that provided legal aid to low-income families navigating estate disputes. The irony was not lost on either of us. I did not reach out to him. Not yet. But I kept the door unlocked, in the way you keep a door unlocked when you're not sure whether the person on the other side is ready to come in. Some months later, a letter arrived, handwritten, which surprised me. Daniel had not written a letter by hand since his father was alive. It was not long. He said he understood, finally, that what he had done was not about estate planning or financial oversight. He said he had been afraid, he thought, of what my decline might mean, and he had managed that fear the wrong way by trying to control what couldn't be controlled. He said he knew that didn't excuse anything. He said he was trying, for the first time, in a long time, to do something that required him to be better than he had been. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for anything. I read the letter twice at the kitchen table, and then I set it down and looked out at the garden, where the first crocuses of the season had pushed through the frost-hard soil along the fence line, violet and precise, and entirely indifferent to the difficulty of emerging from the cold. I wrote back 3 weeks later. Not much. Just enough. I told him I was listening.